Welcome back. We're completing our GitLab highly available horizontal scaling setup today with the application servers. We're following this setup with the exception of one load balancer, 2 application servers, and 3 Redis servers. I've already installed GitLab on both application servers following these instructions, with the exception of I didn't pass an external URL into the actual install command. So let's get started. Now on both of these, I have edited the host file to contain all the various information we're going to need. Now, as we're going to be using NFS, we need to go ahead and install the nfs-common package. We'll wait for that to complete. With that completed, we now need to go ahead and pre-make some of our folders like we did on the NFS server. So we're going to make git-data. We're going to make the .ssh folder. We're going to make the gitlab-rails upload folder. We're going to make the gitlab-rails shared folder. And we're going to make the gitlab-ci builds folder. And we'll need to do that on both of these. So let's go ahead and do that. There's our CI builds. There's our Rails shared. There's our Rails upload. There's our .ssh. And there's our git data. Now with that in place, we need to edit the etc fstab file. We're going to keep the values that are there because they're pretty important. And what we need to do is go ahead and paste in some settings here. Now what this is going to do is point to our NFS server, the folder it's going to use on the NFS server, and then where it's going to use it here. We're going to use the NFS4 version, and then we're going to pass in a bunch of options. I'm going to go ahead and save that and do that on both of these servers. fstab, keep those, paste that in, and save. Now we need to go ahead and mount these, so we can do sudo mount-a to mount everything in the fstab file, and we shouldn't get back any errors. And then we can confirm these mounted by running mount, and we will see set lines like this for our NFS setup. Now with this in place, we need to go ahead and edit the etc gitlab-rb file. We'll go ahead and do this on server 1. We're going to delete all of that because we have our own settings. And then we're going to go ahead and copy everything that we're using. Going over this quickly, we have the external URL, which is going to point to my actual public. This is actually the load balancer, but we're going to set the mount point to var opt gitlab get data. This tells it basically, yeah, don't start if that NFS mount's not available, since that's all of our get data. We're going to give it the application rule to tell it that it's acting as an application server, so it doesn't need things like Redis and Postgres. We're going to make sure Nginx is enabled, and we're going to make sure that Postgres is disabled. We're going to pass in the Postgres connection details. Now, you want to actually connect it to the PG bouncer, so make sure the host is the IP address of PG bouncer, in this case, internal, the port, and then whatever password you're using, password in my case, and then the encoding, I'm using Unicode. We're also then going to pass in the Redis information. The master name is gitlab-redis, and the password is password. And then we're going to set up our Sentinel setups. This is basically going to be the host IP of all of them, and then whatever port you configured, in this case default. Now to ensure there's no permission issues, we need to set the UID and GIDs of various users. So the default user, which will be Git, is going to use 9000, the web server will use 9001, and the registry is going to use 9002. And we want to tell it not to perform auto migrations. We're going to go ahead and save that, and we can do a gitlab-ctl reconfigure. And while that runs, let's go over to web 2 and do the same thing. gitlab-rb, delete all this, and paste it in. They'll both use the exact same settings, which is super convenient here. Now we're going to save this, but we're not going to save this, but we're not going to reconfigure quite yet. So let's go back to 1 and wait for that to finish. Now with our first web server configured, we're going to go ahead and set up the database. To do this, we're going to do gitlab-rake, gitlab:/db:/configure. And we'll wait for that to finish. With that completed, we're almost done here, but we need to go ahead and cat the etc gitlab-secrets.json file. And we're going to need to copy all of this over to our secondary server. So we'll go ahead and copy this and go over to our secondary server, and then we're going to edit gitlab-secrets.json and paste in those values. That we're going to save it And now we should be good to go ahead and configure. But first, we're going to go ahead and tell it to skip the auto reconfigure. We don't want GitLab. We don't want the secondary doing that. And we'll go ahead and run the reconfigure and wait for that to finish. With that completed, our highly available horizontally scaled setup is complete. So we should be able to go ahead and go to our thing. Just to make sure cache doesn't come into play, I'm going to go ahead and open the incognito browser and go to gitlab.jcollier.com. With that, it loads and tells us we need to create a password for our account. So I'll create a password, and then I can sign in as the root username using that password I just created. Now, just to confirm everything's working right, I tend to recommend we go ahead and create a project. It doesn't need to be anything super fancy. We'll just call it test, and we'll make it public and give it a README. This should create some files and database entries. With that, we can see the project was created, so we know that our instance is working correctly. And that's all there is to it.